this and many other such ceremonies. I don't know what I mean by that. It's just a little sentence that came into my mind. I think there's something about performance art, or the form of performance art that we practice, which I do find extraordinarily ceremonial. The rituals, even the rituals of all of you in the chairs in the room, and the way that we pay attention, the way that we congregate, and we give the time and space and energy towards one another, and how special that is, how special the idea of these really unorthodox and unique ceremonies that we create when we make performance. So I'm delighted to be part of this session and this meeting and this history, because it is also a sense that we're all slotting into an expanded history of performance art, and one that I still feel very passionate about after 30 years, even though it has so much detracting against it. And I think of us as a very fragile community. I really feel that often we are in a state of precarity, not just through funding, but through the separation and through, I mean, this last 2 years, the kind of intense loneliness that many of us have felt. So it is a joy to be back together and to be, again, able to touch and to connect on so many levels that have been withheld. And that sense of restoring trust in being public bodies and being social bodies, I think is really, really important, because I certainly have felt almost as if I've collapsed into myself and, you know, in some sort of strange way lost a layer of humanity. And I think one of the things about performance is that people sometimes ask me who I am when I'm performing. And I feel like, well, I'm never more myself than when I'm performing. That's really me at the apex of who I am as a human being. Because I feel like as a social body and as a person, I'm quite shy, and I like to disappear, or I like to kind of ghost into the background of things. So, and often in performances, maybe I am a little bit like a ghost. I'm not such an authoritative or strong figure. But I feel like there's something about that moment of interaction, or that moment of encounter, that allows me to blossom and to become fully myself, which is something that I really value about performance art. I think initially when I was young, maybe I thought that performance art was a form of revenge for being ignored, or being invisible, or being so easily oppressed, which was certainly how I felt growing up. I don't feel that way anymore. I don't feel like I need to perform to prove who I am. I feel that I perform to be present in the fullest capacity that I have, and to share. I feel like more and more that my body kind of expands or stretches. So it's not so much about me, I. It's not the me show. I feel that when I perform, I'm kind of maybe capable of being inhabiting multiple selves, or inhabiting a sense of occasion with those who are present. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll try and unpack it. So that's what you give me, this German verb, handeln. And this is how I've tried to make sense of it. I don't know why, but I'm starting with Beuys's Feldsuit. Something about the terminology of the description that I was sent made me think about tactility, and this thing of haptic intelligence has become very important to me, and tactile memory, how we react upon things and how we remember again and again and again the residue of sensation you know, when you look at the felt suit, you know what it is to touch. And that's what's interesting for me about it, the stodginess of it as a form, its hollowness, its emptiness, and yet that sense of almost like an overwhelming, like density. You know, it reminds me very much of my grandfather's generation and the thickness of their clothing and what it was to touch them and to be enfolded. And it also makes me think of Elaine Scarry, whose amazing book, The Body in Pain. She talks about arming and disarming, and how the body, as a sensory being, is kind of constantly in a state of arming and disarming. You know, felt it fine. These are just little notes that I made to myself. I was putting this together last night and this morning. You know, felt it fine. And then, you know, it's this thing of how we search, and, you know, you put in Joseph Beuys felt and you get a whole kind of spectrum of ways that that one material was used. And I think about how we are as artists, and how habitually we return again and again and again to the taste of salt, the sensation of cloth, the grain of wood, you know, all of the things that we rely upon. And I often feel when people ask me, why do you choose specific materials to perform? And on some level, I choose some objects that I don't know or that I don't care about. Maybe, you know, the teaspoon that's in the cafe before you make the performance. So some things are very throwaway and ordinary, and then some things are really hyper specific and personal through the way that your body has worn them in. And I've always felt as an artist that I needed like a combination of touch. If you put just new materials in front of me coated in plastic that I had to unwrap, I wouldn't enjoy that as a way to begin a performance, because I feel very much that I need the immediacy of some things where I recently burnt, well, 2 years ago actually, I burnt one of my hands very badly, and I took away basically the fingertips. And for several months, I mean, probably for about a year, I really had problems performing in how I was sensing through my left hand. And I would often, I'm not a careless person, but I was often like dropping cups and dropping glasses. And I realized like I just couldn't gauge the right intensity of pressure that I needed to hold on to something. So it was a kind of one of those learning curves of the skin and the sensation and the nerves growing back in my hand, and also adapting and compensating. And I feel like we're constantly doing that. And as you get older, more and more, maybe it's overt when you perform, the degree to which you're compensating and listening to objects rather than telling objects. So I feel like that's a kind of evolution that happens where you become more aware of how something is altering you and how you are adjusting in time, moment by moment, continuously to everything that you're in contact with. So when I just look at that kind of like cacophony of felt, and I think, yes, we are obsessive, you know, certain things are so deeply embedded and so important. And I would say, coming back from very, very early childhood, I mean, one of my earliest memories is sucking my thumb. And my parents were quite upset about that, because I was sucking my thumb really until I was too big. And they had a kind of like time limit on the fact of like, well, you know, you should have stopped doing that by now. And they would use all kinds of different treatments and all kinds of things from the chemist. And then eventually it was just about like putting mustard on my thumb every night. And that little ceremony of the mustard, and still with all, like, it didn't stop me. So this went on until I was probably about 6, So certain things like that, the smell or the taste of something, the feeling of something, it's so deeply embedded. I don't think you could ever have any intellectual distance from it, because it's an emotional affinity. So feces, forget me not, just kind of like just rifting off one word onto the next, and maybe something about the heaviness of the cloth, and the idea of like mustard and stains and gravy, and the phenomena within performance art of liquids, the way that we engage with liquidity almost in every single performance, and then also the insistence on the mouth, the oral, if you like, oral fixation that happens in performance art, how readily we engage the mouth as an extra eye, as an extra arm, as an extra foot, the way that we hold and that we grip with our mouth. I'm really drawn to that in performance, and that kind of phenomena of measuring and feeling and tasting things. So what can't be touched, and it made me think of Monica and Rudy, and I thought about a fantastic breakfast I had with them in Vancouver. No, sorry, Toronto, sorry. And there we were in Toronto in a hotel, eating scrambled egg, I think, which should be the performance arts food of distinction. I think it should have its own Hall of Fame. But I can remember they said that the hardest performance they'd ever done was that they'd been asked to reenact a piece by Stuart Brisley, which involved shit, dog shit, and human shit, and they said they just couldn't do it. And what they'd done is they had rather craftily, they'd substituted plastic dog shit out of a joke shop. And I loved it because they were so childlike in the way that they revealed their deception and their inability to touch the material, and yet how kind of critical it was inside the work of Stuart Brisley. So untouchable, and the idea of a trough came to mind, like animal feed, eating like an animal, and the roughness of that, and then also a kind of idea of truth, a kind of like rawness and accessibility to the bestial. Maybe in some sense, I mean, as a performance artist, I gave a lecture yesterday to photography and video students, and I was really aware as I was talking that a lot of them are a little bit horrified by the idea of performance art. And in part, if you ask them what they're afraid of, they find there's something that repels them. And I think in part that's that legacy of actionism and their mental kind of preconception of like bloody ritual, and narcissism as well. Talking of Stuart Brisley, yeah, I panic, the way that we arrange things, the way that we understand the combinations and the disparate aspects of putting the wrong materials together. I'm really fascinated by artists who use what I would call the wrong materials. Brisley's not one of them, but I would think about somebody like Gustave Uto. I can remember making a performance with a set of electronic doors and doing such a beautiful job of like dancing into this absence, and this kind of conversation with a sensor, and and this invisible AI responsiveness, and that signaling and like playfulness of triggering something, I can't feel a fucking thing. I quite often feel that way. And when I'm in a performance, if people ask, how do you define failure in performance? Well, I define failure by walking away from it and recognizing that I didn't feel anything. And it does happen, it does happen. We're not machines, and you can't force yourself to be able to inhabit that wonderful space of being simultaneously internalizing and externalizing, and sitting in that gateway, and floating within that recognition that you are being watched and that something is happening in real time, and the actuality of being in public, but then also being able to go right deep inside. And Alistair would always talk about it as being infinite space, that if you look inside yourself, what you discover is infinite space. And I find that idea really beautiful and also really difficult. But he says you don't need anything. You look inside yourself and you have infinite space. And if I have the awareness in a performance to recognize that, and to give my actions time, or to give myself a moment to feel, a moment just to allow the sensorial, the nervous system to kick back in and to become fully present, then the actions take care of themselves. I love in that performance too, where Rudy on the other side of the stage is drawing a chalk circle and inhabiting it with tiny little plastic animals, little children's toys, and that kind of naivete, but like a knowing naivete, and like that ability to go into a childlike perspective without it being either ridiculous or patronizing. And I feel like when we're performing, how do we become childlike? Like, it's amazing when you're performing and you suddenly find yourself just softening and just going with something in all its foolishness, or all its pathos even, because sometimes it's because it's such a small, insignificant thing that you're reacting to. I would say that this is the most persistent question that I have as an artist. How do you unnumb yourself? It's not true for every person, but again, particularly in the last 2 years, it has felt like a deep sleep, like Sleeping Beauty. How to come out. And I think why I began performance art, when I think back to being a very young artist, it was initially to respond to the grief I felt when my grandmother died. And I couldn't remember her face, which is quite a normal process within grief, that it can take some time before you remember somebody's features. And to unnumb myself, I was remembering small actions that she'd done that I connected only to her, not to anyone else, only to her. So it was things like putting burnt matches back into the matchbox and mixing them with the new ones, and just tiny, tiny little kind of gestures of touch. And then I would just photograph the residues, and this was my way of beginning to return her to myself. And she's often with me when I perform, and I can't really explain that. But I think many people have a sense of almost like a caring presence, or a guardian maybe that's with them. A sensation of maybe having other people's bones inside you. I think this is what I mean about just letting the situation come right through you. You know, when all of you, when every part of you on a cellular level is just rooted into place, and the profundity of that feeling, how that nobody can take it away from you, that feeling, you know, and those times in your life when it happened. But also the feeling sometimes that it's unattainable, that you're in a suspension or you're flickering, you're feeling you're folding in. That suspension or hovering, disassociation, that's also something I connect to performance when the touch is gone and you're all, you know, you're almost like floating above yourself. That's the most distressing sensation. But again and again, the most powerful performances for me are the ones where there's a phenomena that is present, that the artist is working within, something in the circumstance, in the situation, is framing the timing of it, and is framing the urgency or the actuality of it. Ceremonies. Receiving strange messages from the base of my spine. Where do images come from? Where do performance ideas come from? I mean, for me, it's very mysterious. I'm never in control of these strange images that pass into my mind, and then when you try to make sense, I don't try to make sense of them. I just try to work with them. I just try to find some approximation or some way to connect to that little image that somehow sits in my mind. Amazing piece by Victoria Gray, almost excruciating in its sensitivity. And the feeling of a crisis manifesting inside a body in front of you and taking hold of the entire body, the entire self. And the strength to allow that to be public. Incredible vulnerability. Being anointed, being blessed, being received, being absolved, being revealed. You know, why do we perform? I quite often write notes after I've watched something. Merce Cunningham on Vimeo, I watch him do a dance only with his hands. The footage is poor quality, I watch it twice. The sequence is short but complicated. He wears a purple shirt. I notice that he wears purple in other videos. His elfin-like face behind the hands, they flicker and move. The choreography is unclear in terms of gesture, but reminiscent of the distractedness of hands playing on a typing keyboard or on a computer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. In one hand, upright, vertical, as if an instrument, the hands play off each other and then also apart from each other. Mixed messages, mixed signs. The craft of a dancer able to make the body do two distinctly different things at the same time. The discordance fascinates the gap between what each hand means in its gestures, containing a wave of curiosity, all fleeting, all already gone. I think of Kazu Ono dancing with one paralyzed hand. That was in his 90s. And I think too, like I have friends who've become very ill in the last few months, not just with COVID. And it's been an interesting conversation with them that's been going on in the background about what they do now that their physical capacity is severely altered, and watching them find a way, really, really powerful to see the essence of something. Host bodies, hybrid bodies, mutable, mortal, mesmerized. It's just moments of performance art that are mesmerizing, where you watch somebody in their zone, in this kind of trance, where they're perfectly in control of not being in control, which seems contradictory, but it's like that capacity to entirely let go of forcing the situation and just to receive. So this is something I wrote quite recently. It's going to be really hard to read it because it's splitting across my screen, but it's just about Alistair, and it's in his book that we're launching next week. So I'm talking about an encounter where the very first performance I ever saw Alistair do, what struck me was the fact that I couldn't tell if the body in the room was moving. He was so still that there was something shocking about the stillness. And I it really stuck with me, this kind of slipperiness of somebody being so present, but also so anonymous, an easy sense of the audience becoming witness to their own craving or needs, an experience that arouses an acute feeling of physical and psychological absence. By that I mean the work of his performances is not activated through what is shown as the visual elements, nor indeed a virtuosity in his movements, but conversely, through what emerges in comprehending the total situation as a system of interconnected relations. In part, his task-like, understated behavior is a method of carving out space and archaeology of suggested inhabitants. Each visitant is offered a chair, a place at the table, plates and cutlery, shadow, name and number, flesh and blood, a gamut of offerings. This dance of sustenance for the absent, including those marginalized as well as those who have passed, brings forward a curious interplay with audiences who often strain to stabilize their own position within the proposed ceremony. But what matters here is that the scope of the experience rebounds beyond the artist's own needs and can be perceived as personal and relatable to everyone in the room. The affiliation to death that McLennan proposes involves sitting beside or attending to mortality in quiet acceptance. Yet in this reformed liturgy, traced through the suffering patient body, there's also a drawing outward of the idea of sustenance, remembering that in religious etiquette, feasting and fasting are intimately connected. So that's just the sense, and it's not just Alistair. I mean, I kind of propose this as an experience that's integral to a lot of performance art. Is the sense that you're not just watching a person in their particularity, in their individuation as a named entity, but that also what passes through them is this kind of like shadow play of memories of others, and the way that they float in front of you and open up this space. For me, open up a space of memory, open up like this box of like this encyclopedia of gestures and times and places and feelings and people, presences, you know, and I love that about performance art. I never see it as only about the person in front of me, and equally when I'm performing, it's not just about me. So that's it. Stop sharing. Yeah, great.
Yeah, fantastic.
Now I can drink.
Yay!
So, I mean, I don't know if any of that made sense. It was put together very, very quickly, but I just wanted it to be kind of quite spontaneous and sketchbook-like. So it's just, and I also just wanted to talk or to show images of artists that I love, you know, because I see this as a moment of inspiration and collectivity. Because I mean, often it's a question I like to ask people, like, you know, what's the best performance you've seen this year, you know, because we tend to sort of gravitate into the problems, and but it's like, you know, how to just like celebrate the really special work that we see. So I always try to remind myself of that. I always try to like lock away the really good stuff, the gold.